Great ideas kill indie games. More specifically, big ideas, unique ideas, ideas which wear its influences on its sleeves to create something special. Ideas which fill your mind that you can't stop daydreaming of, wishing it were real. Kill games before they're even made. Which is bad, because I also want to make a game. Making games takes a long time. A single feature carries months or years of development time. Open world, multiplayer, RPG, even seemingly indie-friendly ideas like roguelike, story-driven, or cozy games can take years to develop. The longer development goes on, the harder it is to add meaningful features without making hacked-together solutions, introducing bugs, and hurting performance. The time it takes to make a game is important. Motivation goes down, expectations rise, and the goalposts change with the landscape of the time. This is amplified in a solo project. Each good idea, which is easy to think of and hard to create, can eventually drown an unprepared foundation. If you have unreachable aspirations, you will inevitably give up when you fail to meet them. To deepen the waters, I've never really finished a game. The age-old advice is to start small. However, here I am talking about my dream game, which is an action RPG with alchemy as the main form of progression. I'm taking notes from Monster Hunter, Minecraft, Cultist Simulator, Stardew Valley, and Terraria. Just from the influences, you can tell even the minimum viable product has an unwieldy scale. I know the work will be immense, but I have a plan to complete this. First is to plan, log, and organize thoroughly. I'm still not entirely sure which tools I'll use for this, but starting a system will help with accountability, knowing what needs to be done, and improving as the developer. Secondly, and more importantly, is to turn systems into components. My idea is to treat core systems almost like individual games. The goal here is to make these pieces, movement, combat, inventory, etc., as if I'm planning on reusing them. This way, each component is both progress on the game and an addition to my library as a developer. Also, in the worst case, I can build something with a smaller scope using these parts that I made. Between these two, I should be able to build a robust foundation that is easy to build onto, possible to refactor into a smaller scope, and to grow with me as a game dev that can eventually become a fully featured game. I guess all that's left is to get started. The first component I'll make is movement. The way I see it, movement can make or break a game by how it answers three questions. How do I get from point A to B? How does it feel? And how responsive is it? On one side we have functionality and mechanics, and on the other we have game feel. Adding more complexity on the first question adds depth to the movement system, but could potentially make movement unintuitive or unwieldy. Too little complexity can make movement become boring over the course of the game. I personally like movement around here. I get bored of moving around at a single speed for a long time without a change in input, but I'm also not too interested in advanced and dominant movement tech like wave dashing. Any tech, in my opinion, should be at least somewhat intuitive, and preferably be taught diegetically rather than a tutorial video or a wiki. While feeling is mostly the vibe, like animations, effects, and sound, it also talks about how weighty the character feels and how quick it is relative to itself in the world. We want to tune the feeling to match our intended sense in our game. Are we small and quick, slow and lumbering? In the past, I've made sluggish and underpowered movement that eventually gets better later to give a sense of progression without being too crazy fast in the endgame, but starting at too low of a point will make players not want to keep playing your game. Terraria's movement progression is really solid, where the base movement doesn't change all that much, but as you advance in the game, you add more effects and tools at the ends of each mechanic. Feeling should resonate with what story you're telling with your movement. There should not be crazy effects for the basic run, unless you want your player to feel like even the basic movement is strong, but you should add special effects for special movement, so it makes using it more satisfying and impactful. Responsiveness is the result of the two prior components of movement. This ends up being a measure of player mobility. We need it at a certain level if we want the player to be able to dodge or react quickly to something, but if it's too high, we can become too powerful and the difficulty of the game becomes trivial. The most basic movement would be a sprite changing position based on input. Getting from point A to B is simply running. It's very responsive. It feels snappy, but also weightless. And it's pretty boring. We can add animations for a pretty big boost in feel. At this point, it is a perfectly serviceable movement system. It does what it needs to. Even though the mechanics are lacking, the feel is good enough to make it seem fine. But we want to improve the feel and add some additional verbs. Firstly, for the feel, a slight acceleration makes the player feel like they have a body. The responsiveness goes down now, because we can't immediately get away at top speed from something, but the feel improves, our input has more importance, and our movement is slightly more thoughtful. I did this by making a generally physical-based model using acceleration acting on the node's built-in velocity. I have an acceleration constant that's added each frame in the input direction, and a deceleration constant that pulls the player back towards velocity 0, which is much stronger when the player is standing still. The acceleration in the direction of input gets smaller the closer the player is to the top speed in the input direction, until they're running at a fixed top speed. That way the player can build speed, be knocked back, and not stop on a dime if they're going fast. I still have it slowed down pretty quick though. However, there's a really big flaw in this. Because the deceleration is coupled to the acceleration, changing it affects the top speed and the acceleration while moving. But I need to have deceleration high because I don't want the player to drift around, as sick as that would be, which means I have to have the acceleration high, and so on. I want tight control over my variables, but I needed a break from that, so I decided to take on some spriting. I was split between a 4-direction and 8-directional movement. But I think having 8 directions matches my philosophy of game development. I want to be attentive to the time cost return in any feature. Some things are easy to make and go a long way if planned well, others are tedious and will need to be iterated upon. Like, I still need to put arms on this guy and the run animation is still a little wonky. But I know the player will spend their entire playtime looking at the character, so doubling the sprites is a worthy investment. I eventually hooked up the animations and directions the right way and it felt pretty good despite all the placeholder stuff. Although the drifting around was really getting out of hand now that I could see what direction I was actually facing. I was pretty tired after all the pixel art but proud of what I made so far, so I made this little video to show my friends what I was doing. They didn't care. By the next day, I'd forgotten how long the spriting takes, so I decided to make animations for the sprinting and rolling. These are the next 2 mechanics I want to add, which would make my movement options double. Before that, I added an idle animation, which again goes a long way. The slightly chibi proportions makes the bobbing cute and fitting. The roll gives you a flat velocity in a direction. If used correctly, you could roll out of knockback or instantly get to top speed with it. When I had combat, I'll add invincibility frames to the roll, so then I could raise the bar for the types of attacks that the player will receive, since they have a get out of jail free card. Then I added sprinting, which gives a higher top speed and acceleration. I changed the animation to make our guy cover some more ground, but I didn't have to make a sprint animation. I think it was worth it, it greatly improves the feel. Right here, I suffered to find the balance between the coupled acceleration and deceleration. It's still not dialed yet. But then I realized that the deceleration could just point towards your current speed and the direction you want to go, so then it'd be pulling you towards your input without speeding you up or slowing you down. So now I can adjust each parameter individually to change how the movement feels. I'm super happy with this outcome. I added a stamina bar and some particles for the sprint. The stamina is just a cost for movement, which balances things out so different movements make sense in different contexts. I'm not normally a super fan of stamina, but the base movement speed is still pretty high and it recovers quickly. So far, I like what it does for the movement. I set sprinting and rolling to both take stamina and made it so standing still means you regenerate stamina faster. For the stamina bar, I used the spring formula for smoother changes. If you run out of stamina, you get a small punishment of losing all your input while a dopey little animation plays. I got these from the first frames of the roll. It's not too punishing, but could play a role in combat or in a time-sensitive situation. It just encourages the player to pay attention to the stamina bar. I added a final piece of movement, the dash. If you dash twice, you go into the roll. The dash gives you a burst of speed but does not lock you into an animation like the roll. so it's less stamina committal and potentially more aggressive. With everything I already made, it came together pretty quick. I was worried about adding too many pieces to the movement kit that would make the controls unintuitive, but the double dash into the roll works well with the sprint without taking too many buttons. I switched to a single particle because I think it looks better, and then I synced them up with the movements. I tweaked them a little bit longer. I feel like they look good now, but without the context of the rest of the world, it's hard to tell if it's good or bad, so I'll definitely revisit them later. A good core movement kit means that things aren't redundant, there's an opportunity of skill expression, and there's engagement in using them. Since I'm done adding features for now, we can test how well they stack up against each other. Here's the sprinting without managing your stamina. It's exaggerated to constantly be running out of stamina like that, but I wanted a baseline for it to be worse than walking over a long distance. Next is the dash and the proper sprint. They fly out ahead in a short distance and ease up to a steady state. Although, it looks like the dash is faster than the sprint. I think it's good for the dash to be the fastest at a really short distance, but it's clear it's too powerful right now. I can simply increase the stamina drain and it becomes much more reasonable. I could probably go further with this adjustment, and it may make sense for it to be slower than walking over that far of a distance. The movement kit's already pretty good, and there's so much left to do. I imagine this level of movement is a little ways into character progression, so you'd start with less stamina and perhaps a little bit less top speed. Code-wise, I also think this is a great component. Everything is stat-driven and it sends signals for a bunch of different events that I'd ever want to monitor. One thing about working on software for a long time is that you spend a lot of time scrolling through code, especially your main scripts like your player script and your world script. But look how empty the player script is, it's great. I'm happy with where the movement's at the end of this DEVLOG 0.5. I learned a lot from this first cycle of development. Mainly, features take a long time to make. I thought I was going to be done with the movement so much quicker than I actually was, but the spriting just takes so much time, and the code, for how little there actually is, requires a lot of tweaking and doubling back on yourself in testing. So I both want to leave myself more time for individual components, but also kind of speed up and work a bit more deliberately. Also, I want to talk about what makes the game special. Like, I have this idea of the game in my head and it's this really amazing, cool thing, but I didn't actually talk about what would make it better than different games and makes this series actually worth watching. So that's something that I'm going to try to do in the future, is sort of speak my vision a bit more. I also want to show some more personality. Like right now, my scripts are kind of wooden. So if you have any suggestions for how I could make this movement system better, or sort of things that you look for in an alchemy system, please let me know in the comments. Okay. Goodbye.